Thank you.
Hey there, how you doing? Good to see you.
Thanks very much.
How you doing? Nice to see you.
I know.
Thanks, Dave. See you, Dennis. See you later.
Thank you, mate.
Are you coming to the function?
Oh, yeah, I think we better go now.
You're coming down there? I think I'd better. Just keep an eye on you. Cheers, Jeffrey.
Take care. Thank you. See you, bud.
Why not? Why not? Soon, mate. See you. Super, Pete. Great. See you, Colin. Big Terry boy. Hey, good to see you. Really straight. Harry boy. I'm going to see all these couple of guys here.
Thank you, Harry.
Oh, we're going to get a photo of the last group.
I have a great fun memory name.
I'm just going to get a photo of you guys from taking you guys. I'm never going to be here again. You're going to get the back of it. What do you want to do? You're going to take a photo of this, is it?
All those happy memories.
Come here immediately. You ready?
See you later. Ready? See you, Graham.
Moving on down. Yes! Good one. Hey. Oh, thank you. Thank you, guys. Yeah, thank you. Excellent. Welcome there, Pete. I've got 38 pigeons Hi, Fraser. Good girl. Thanks, Peter. They stick around on the walking goes. I think it's another time. Yeah, 2 and 3. Thanks, Peter. See you later. Mark. Okay, see you later. Thanks, Murray. You're very welcome. Is that the warrior one? Nah, definitely not. Thanks very much. Party in the camp. Never fails. Never fails. Thanks very much. You're very welcome. See you later. See you later, Ash. You're welcome.
Catch up. I'll be out of your place in about October. Okay, Murray.
Hello, Peter. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Great to see you. Stop and tap it.
No kissing in the intervals, Jim. No kissing in the intervals. Good to see you. Mark Perry. I know where she's been. How are you doing, Murray? And Mark Perry. Good to see you.
That's most enjoyable.
Well, that's great.
You still got to pass it all.
It's all right. It's all right. I don't have any bags. Very good. Thanks very much, Ron.
The Wailing Wall. What are we going to do without it?
John, just went under the cloud. Sorry about that. Lovely flight. Very nice. Just smile, guys.
Mrs. Samuels, did you get to lean over the Wailing Wall, Mrs. Ray? I did. Thank you, Mrs. Knight. I was waiting to be invited up.
See you later,
Right,
Ben.
Joe, you've got terrible.
Thanks, Peter.
I was waiting for your legs to bring me out. I know one has to be invited up.
No, he told the height it was him. Engineer always doesn't land.
Thank you, guys.
See you later. Bye-bye. Hello, mate. What are you? What do you think I am? Just a clue. I'll talk to you later. See you later. How's it going? Graham.
Pete, will I wait for you down here? Will I wait for you?
Oh, okay.
Will I wait for you down here?
Watch out. You're very welcome.
You've got to go out the other door, otherwise you won't get pictures.
You go with the camera when he runs off.
Thanks for your company. I see you've got a right for them again, Mark.
Not just you by yourself.
Okay.
You and the other guy.
Okay. Sorry.
John
See you
wants
later.
to
hydraulic sandwiches.
You're welcome, Max.
Hey, Mac. Hey, Chief.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye. Okay. See you later.
Smooth one over.
Thank you very much.
Peter, that was really good. Alan, see ya. Good one. Catch up later.
Very clean. I didn't know what
Yes, Colin. Just make sure the airplane's leaving tomorrow.
Who did the land?
Well, it's next Friday night. Thanks.
See you later.
Take care.
Bye-bye, guys. See you soon. Bye now. Murray.
Did she take that? Oh, hang on. Did Lisa take that? Yeah, I think it was in a handbag.
I can scale it if there's something left in it.
Yeah, it's full.
Okay.
It's not full, it's empty.
Just
I can tell I fill it
How do you say that? Water can't wait on there, Tony.
Last bottle. One more. 5, 6, 7.
Okay, hurry up. Space on the bus. Not going to work.
how do you work this thing?
Not gonna work, sorry guys.
Well, bugger me.
Don't say that again.
Back,
Len, you're on.
Okay,
See you, Johnny, looking well.
All right, be on. Got a couple of, you don't have to take it home with you, Glenn. It's all right. We've got some up.
Get a video of this fella.
oh, Glenn, an empty bottle?
No, it's full.
Well, we've got plenty up the road. Yeah, back bus. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, guys.
No, thank you.
Right.
Well, we're off to the next venue. Where's the last bus? Wine, a few wine bottles.
I'm taking this one home with me.
So you should. Well, this is the photographic session. What they're trying to do is get the real old codgers. This is DC6's flying boats. Yeah, up to DC6s, I believe. There's a dozen guys here. We'll see if we can pick them off when they get them in some semblance of order.
You're doing a Polaroid first.
Okay.
So you can relax.
Engine failure.
Hey there.
But I'm smiling, I'm going to smile on your face later.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay, go enjoy.
We're running a little bit late, but what that was is the flying boats, DC6 era and CFEs. The next one is FEAs who commenced flying with the company in the 1960s, so we'll see who that brings up. We're getting all these guys together. It's probably going to be more difficult than getting the older ones, but we'll have a look at them all individually in a moment. Well, these are the guys that started flying in the 60s, and almost without exception. There's a few of them in there. We'll go through them all in a moment. Well, this shot's being taken with the wide angle lens on, and believe it or not, you can't actually get everyone up. And this, while they're all misbehaving, they'll just record a bit because they think they can get away with it. But in actual fact, we'll be able to pick out those that are really paying a bit of attention and those that aren't. There's a few people who've had varied careers amongst this one. Difficult to control. Well, there you have it. What is it?
Alright then. Now, we're taking a picture of them all. All guys coming in. Barry. Goodness gracious, it's a big collection. Alright, we're on recording now at long last. And we'll take an overview, and here's the group of the 70s. There they are, all there now, getting ready. The photographer's just getting them ready into position. And so now we'll see, oh God, they're so there. Murray. Oh, someone's going to miss out. I'll go to Barry above then. Peter. Bud. Oh. Goodness gracious. There he's down again. Oh. There we are. There's the man of the moment. Giving us the smile. Alan. Tim. Winston. Oh, so.
Oh, hang on.
I'm looking very serious. Dave, Gunberry. Right in your way. I'll get back a bit. Backing up now. Here we are. There's all the final group again. Hey, I'm too old.
It's a regimental dinner, and you don't do that kind of thing.
Trudy, I heard that. I went to
So here we are.
and they said you don't. I was shocked.
Okay,
Oh, what a gorgeous looking lot.
happy faces.
Happy faces.
This way.
They all say smile.
Oh, of course. Somebody say.
Thanks very much.
Okay, we've moved to another generation or another half generation, 10 years. Ages don't necessarily quite fit, but these are the guys that started in the 80s. Fine gaggle. It's hard to get through the photographer, but we'll pick them all up.
Go to the East store because no one knows where the East store. I was really bloody impressed that I figured out this was the East store.
I didn't know so. Is this
Yep. Okay. Gillis Boy has arrived. Here they come. Yeah, there's always one in every crowd. And another one. Oh, talk about Brown's cows.
What a fine team of lads. What a lovely lassie. That's my
Righto. Looks looking good.
Can you hold them after you've taken your shots? I'll grab that other camera for a second. You don't realise. Well, I've just been advised that there's flight engineers who commenced flying with the company in the 90s. And Dave tells me, you're it?
Close to it, Lynn.
You're it?
But there's Rex and Brad.
And that's it?
Well,
it's not a big representation.
Everyone else is out. They're actually working.
They're actually, they've been wise enough to go and get jobs. That's good. Well, you get your photos taken. I'll follow it up with this.
It's not going to be.
Well, here they are. There may be the smallest group, but they're certainly not the least important. And if this guy had shipped, I'd get them all. Here we go. Okay, one more. Big smile. The last group of the day is the flight crew of the day, so we'll get some video of them in a minute. Now these guys all volunteered for this tour today. Jeannie, Maggie, oh, there's a few. Mark is a big one.
Oh, baby. Give it to me, baby. Look at that one. That's, no, it's not. I can tell.
Still a couple more to come in.
So there's still a couple to come. There's always a couple late starters.
Should we have the skipper in the middle? Should we have the captain in the middle holding the ball?
We need a bloke on that team.
Well, they've been shuffling this team. Now they've ended up. Put Murray on the other end.
Oh, the old ones in front.
What you can't see is what's happening here. Murray's been shifted 3 times. No, he should be in the front. What a team photo.
Okay, here we go. We've got our happy faces on.
I hope you've seen this in that.
Thank you.
Now we've got a wee problem here because this young Miles was so busy he was late, but they're going to insert him into his group photo and no one will know the difference. There he is, big group. He was always in trouble. He's just keeping up the standards.
Appropriate for this momentous, and I have to say I think a utterly unique occasion. It'd be fair to say I don't think we'll ever see this group together again in this form. We just had an absolutely marvellous flight on the 47, and thanks to the generosity of Ron Tannock. And we sort of felt tonight should be momentous and memorable, but it also should be a time of acknowledging the tremendous contribution that flight engineers have made to aviation over the years. And I've just realised I haven't introduced myself. Most of you know me. I'm Brian Minus, the manager of flight operations. I'd like to do something quite special before we get into the meal, and that's to acknowledge and recognise some really key people that have contributed to aviation, both from the chief flight engineer point of view and from the manager of flight operations point of view. We have a very unique group of people here tonight. I'd like to acknowledge Chief Flight Engineer Bert Carlino. I think I'm right in saying that the chief flight engineers of Bert's experience and age go right back to the very early days of the flight engineers, and they commenced on the Empire flying boats some 59 years ago, 1940 if I'm correct. And the Empire flying boat sat 19 passengers, I'm told. Ron was nodding. He obviously knows a lot about them. I could also acknowledge Chief Flight Engineer Jim Robertson. Thanks very much, Jim. We're also very fortunate to have here another Chief Flight Engineer, Dom Olive. Dom. We've also got to acknowledge our current Chief Flight Engineer, Peter Allen. Also tonight we have present a number of managers flight operations going back certainly to the early 60s and maybe a little bit before. Can I ask you to acknowledge also Captain Doug Keesing? And Manager of Flight Operations, Steve Abernathy. Told the next person was going to be here, but I haven't seen him. Captain David Eden. Yes? We also have here, well known to us in perhaps more recent times, Captain Peter Grundy. Rather disappointingly, our most recent one, apart from myself, Captain Fred Douglas, unfortunately is really sick in bed and he sends his apologies. He would have loved to have been here. I also need to apologise regrettably for the Managing Director. Jim McRae had planned to be here and he said, I know it's hard to say it, but could you say, even though this was an incredibly important occasion, I unfortunately had a more important appointment in Australia, and you can probably guess what that's about. You could be right. Just two more people to acknowledge, folks, and that is, I mentioned before, our General Manager of Operations for the International Airline, Ron Tannock. And also somebody who started off a number of years ago in engineering and has now risen to the position of General Manager Engineering, and that is Ian Diamond. The next most important thing I think is to start having some food, and can I just run through the housekeeping and how we like to do that? We're going to serve from both the front and the rear of the hall. Mandy is over there, is going to ask you to get up table by table and go to the buffet, and Peggy in the rear will be approaching the tables in the rear. Could I please just emphasise there is no smoking allowed in the hall, and toilets are out the way you came in and to the right. Thanks very much.
What did you do today, John?
Are you going to take up winning for me now? Are you? What else?
Funerals, I think it'll be more funerals. Mike Bowman, hello Michael. Gosh, I've missed you. Where you been?
I've missed you too, Len.
Oh, really?
I've been waiting to go to work again.
Who else? Oh, you've got EO Carmines here, I see. Well, I'm a official photographer. I've just taken on the role now, Mike.
35 years ago, a young Air New Zealand, as it was then, Teal apprentice, had just completed his apprenticeship and he undertook flight engineer training, and he checked out on the L188C Lockheed Electra. He later went on to become chief flight engineer. That person is Peter Allen. And that isn't a jack-up, that's the truth. This very day, 35 years ago. I'd like to hand over to Peter Allen now to get underway with the formalities for the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and good evening, everybody.
Hi.
I thought that there may be a millennium moment we could look at, and that was the only thing I could come up with. Ron Oliver did check me out 35 years ago today, and it's been a marvellous career for me. Just before we go on, I would like to pass some apologies. We have had probably a dozen or so people have gone down with the flu in the last couple of days and haven't been able to be here. As Brian Weiner said, Fred Douglas was one of those. Peter Carson, John Marr, Graham Nichols, who was going to be the first officer on the flight today. And I've received a letter from Les Simpson, who asked to pass on his best wishes to flight engineers. Les is in fact having open heart surgery this week. And Jim Weir was going to be here. As many of you know, Jim has an acute hearing problem, and it was going to be very difficult for him to be here. He was determined to do so. He said he wanted to see the guys and wish them well. Jim's sister phoned me last night. He is in hospital with a viral infection, and but he certainly wanted to pass on his best wishes. As Brian said earlier, we obviously have some most important guests here tonight, and I again would like to express my welcome to past and present flight engineers, and particularly a number of them who are sitting over here and in fact down in front of me and over the far side, all those guys who were flying boat flight engineers, and there's Jim Robertson, Jim Cranston, Bert Carline, Bill Melville's down here, Jeff Freer over the other side. And all of those people trained me prior to my checkout 35 years ago and subsequently, and I learned a great deal from them and all of the other people who have trained me over the years, and I certainly appreciate that. When we were developing the theme for tonight and who we needed to be here, we considered not only flight engineers, but the fact that this is recognition of the end of company service of a mighty fine airplane, the Boeing 747-200. And I feel very attached to that. I was on the initial project team, and we developed the spec under Ian Diamond, and then accepted the airplane and introduced it to service. And so we we have here tonight a good number of the pilots who have been involved in the fleet management since the beginning of the 747-200 operation. We have representatives from the original Institute of Marine and Power Engineers, and Cliff Arnott is here. That was the original the association that we joined way back in about, I think it was about 1963. Bert Carline and Jeff Frere were instrumental in getting together with Cliff and organising that. And then the subsequent arrangement with the flight engineers branch of where they are now, the New Zealand Association of Marine Aviation and Power Engineers, and there are a number of people representing that organisation here. And we have officials from the Mutual Benefit Fund, which has of course supported flight crew over the years. And Bruce McNair, of course, was chairman of that organisation for a good length of time and is with us tonight. And of course there's flight operations management here, and a good number of the line operations and network logistics support staff, and we certainly appreciate what all of those people have done for us in helping to run the organisation, and particularly in organising tonight the support staff in line operations. Jane Hall here has done a huge amount of work, and as has Stephanie Harris, who's not here now, is she? And assisted by Philippa Sharp, Tina Moore is here, and Clary Hislop, who has finished operating as a flight engineer and is working in flight operations. He did a huge amount of help, and I certainly thank you all very much. Now we will be presenting photographs to those flight engineers who have finished operating with Air New Zealand. That's the regular flight engineers who were with us at the time that the fleet divestment was announced, and there are a good number of them. That will take place a little later on, but what I would like to
you'll have to train me because
present
we're
to
going
you
to
is that
right?
those flight engineers who are finishing their time with Air New Zealand represent over 1,200 years of company service and over 1,000 years of flight engineer experience. Prior to doing that, I'll ask Ron Tannock and Jim Kane to speak. Firstly, I'll introduce Ron Tannock. Ron is the General Manager Airline Operations and is responsible for all of the operational areas of the international airline. Under the new civil aviation rules, he's the air service certificate holder and therefore holds the ultimate safety accountability of the airline. Ron has I would say, a close affiliation with engineers, and I know when he came to Auckland Engineering as to head the engineering base there, Don Olive and I certainly had an immediate rapport with him, and the relationship between flight operations and engineering was certainly enhanced, I believe. And Ron, of course, as he went off to Safe Air and then came back to Air New Zealand and is in the position he is in today, he very readily accepted the fact that it would be a good idea for us to take that airplane for a flight a day, and was able to convince Jim McRae that it was a good idea too. and Jim agreed, and there we had that wonderful occasion, and thank you, Ron, for that. Now, Ron, I've got to say, is an absolute stickler for detail when it comes to document layout, spelling, grammar, and I committed the Cardinal sin the other day in sending him an email of spelling his name incorrectly. I do know how to spell it. I didn't check it thoroughly enough before I sent it off to him.
Sounds like Jenny Shipley.
But I also,
Excuse me.
in laying it out, I didn't check how I was going to print it out, and Brian Minor said to me, do you always write things like that so you can't read the bloody thing after it's been written? And when it did print out, it was impossible to read, so you know, I'm sure that Ron's opinion of flight engineers reduced rapidly at that point, and so I hope it's just recovered enough.
Only of you, Peter.
Oh, okay, that's fine. So that's only 1 out of 60 odd, Ron, and so I'll now ask you to talk to the other 60.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I'm not, you know, that's why they call me spell check too. I have an association with the 747-219B, which is very close because I was chief engineer at the Auckland base when the airplane was introduced in the early 80s, and we took 3 of them in 3 weeks, as I recall, with a 13-month lead time. So while the marketing boys and the technical boys were writing the spec, we were preparing to maintain the airplanes, and we arrived in a hell of a hurry. Welcome to you all, of course, and when Peter says that I convinced Jim McRae to let us borrow the airplane for an hour, a couple of hours, it wasn't really convincing at all. I just said, Jim, you're taking the airplane for a couple of hours, you're taking the flight engineers. He said, yeah, why do you ask? So, you know, that's the relationship Jim has with flight engineers, and there's no problem. And, you know, I think it's been a great success. Everybody has told me how well they've enjoyed it. And thank you for the tech crew, the flight attendants who volunteered to take the airplane. Going back. And I'm not going to make any jokes, as everybody's been telling me, about the appetites of flight engineers.
Not true.
Jeff and all the other flight attendants in the airplane were telling me, and Murray did too, about how they used to have to wear mailed gloves as they passed the food in up the front to the test crew. So, as I said, I'm not even going to mention that. But if we go back in time, and so I've related my close affinity with the 200. Going back in time, I can even relate back to some of the flying boats. Because as we know, on the 30th of April 1940, Captain John Burgess, First Officer Craig, Second Officer C.A. MacDonald, and Chief Steward R.A. Phillips flew the first Tasman service out of New Zealand. Second Officer, obviously, Captain John Burgess was pilot in command. First Officer Craig was in charge of navigation, and Second Officer C.A. MacDonald checked the engines and fuel, according to my records. And so he was the flight engineer, and I've been told tonight that he sat in the toolbox behind the 2 tech crew. And then we move on through the Sandringhams and the civil versions of the Sunderland with the Pegasus 22s and the Pratt Whitney ARC 1830 Twin Wasps. And I was asked tonight, when I was trying to show off how much knowledge I had about these early airplanes, if I knew the dash numbers of the 1830s, and I failed miserably. And then reading the book I had on the 3rd of December 1947 on a Sydney-Auckland flight. The crew had to jettison mail after an engine failure, cargo, and passengers' baggage. Jim Robertson was a flight engineer who is with us tonight, along with 4 other flying boat engineers. And Jim, may I say that when I looked at my misplaced baggage statistics the other day, I think there are still some people doing that. So I get to my other link with flight engineers, and that is when the Solent arrived, and of course we've got the wonderful Solent at Motat with all those enthusiasts, and I was delighted to share some time at their annual general meeting recently, with 4 Bristol Hercules 733 engines. And as Peter said, when I was down in Sayfair, of course I was very closely associated with the Bristol freighter fleet and the Bristol Hercules engines. And when I used, and of course with the Argosy and the Dart, and when I used to go to British Aerospace to try and get spares for these airplanes for, as usual, next to nothing, they used to say, here comes the guy with a flying museum. So, you know, I did relate to the Hercules engines that you had. Now, I'm not going to crew every airplane we've ever flown, but researching material was great fun. And I'm thinking today that we sit with our 744s, with our SATCOM and CNS ATM and all the clever things we do. We sometimes think we're kings of our castle. But when you look back and you look at the exploratory work that we've done with some engines that were reliable and some that were less than reliable. Of course, the Bristol engines were super reliable because they were British. And, thank you. But you think of all the exploratory work, the tech crew, and the flight engineer, of course, had the hard work to do because, you know, the pilots with the kid gloves and superior attitudes. I'm going to leave by this note tonight. The real grunt work was done by the flight engineers. And while, as I said earlier, you know, you were given a toolbox to sit on behind the kid glove boys. You prepared the airplane, and while it might be a sad time with the departure of the 747-200 airplane next week, I think it's a time for reflection and a time for pride in a job extremely well done. Not just on the technical side, but on the development of Air New Zealand from the 1940s when we flew 130 services to Australia in the first year. Now, I haven't quite done the mathematics, but you know, we do 130 services in an extremely short time, and we'll be increasing those in November with the introduction of the new fleet. So, you know, the airline has developed through the efforts of the tech crew, the flight engineers, the flight attendants, the ground support staff, and you know, we've come a long way in 50 years. We're going to go a longer way in the next few years as we develop our core base. So it's a time of pride and satisfaction for a job well done. It's also a time for a bit of nostalgia, and I just wonder how many lies are going to be told tonight about do you remember when. Flight engineers have always carried out their tasks in a thorough and very professional manner, and have served the company extremely well. The loyalty and cooperation of this group is reflected in the excellent relationship we've had with the Flight Engineers branch of the Association of Marine and power engineers, which I had to read that because it's rather a long title. But in general, we've had an excellent relationship with them, and in particular, I've got to recognise Jim Kane for the part he has played in this. And while and the progress of avionics technicalities that have seen radio and navigation offices disappear, we've now reached a stage where the electronic age has seen the demise of flight engineers. We've known it's been coming for some time, and with the flight engineers branch and Jim and his team, we've managed to work through a program that has been at least not sudden-edged and come all of a sudden, and I thank him and his team for that. One of the other aspects of flight engineers that I think has been of significance is that the flight engineer has always been in the loop in the cockpit, even before we had words like CRM, cockpit resource management, or crew resource management. And I think the team in flight operations have got to be given our gratitude for that far thinking, even before the academics were even writing books about it and getting degrees and doctorates about it. But so I think that's quite magic. Now the opportunity came along for the airline to retire the fleet and sell it to Virgin Atlantic Airways. We had 5 airplanes with Rolls-Royce engines. Now there were other operators with Rolls-Royce engines, but we were few and far between, the Qantas and the Cathays, etc. So they were quite a unique passage. And the fact that Virgin Atlantic wanted an airplane that filled a very, very specific range of jobs was sufficient for us to sell them into that range and realise an opportunity for the company to quit an asset, use the word quit in a very specific way, to realise a benefit that probably would not have been available to the company unless Virgin had wanted that specific airplane. And since the announcement of the divestment and then the acceleration of that divestment program, I believe that flight operations management have done their utmost to see that flight engineers were treated with dignity and appropriately, and we certainly appreciate again the relationship we've had with the association in that matter. So I'd just like to finish by thanking all flight engineers, past, present, and I hope that, and I've heard that you've all taken a different approach to some things, and you've explored areas that you may not have thought were available to you. But sincerely, from the company, I'd like to thank you for all your efforts in the past and wish you all the very best in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ron. And there was a comment that just touched a nerve with me, and Nev Hay and Don Hoff will have touched that same nerve when you spoke about SATCOM and advanced navigation systems that we've been trying to justify the business case for on the 747-200 for a good number of years and have never been able to do so. And it's on that Virgin aeroplane, and with advanced navigation systems, digital fuel quantity indicating systems, ACAS, SATCOM, and but they've paid Ian Diamond to put it in there, so That's okay. I'll next ask Jim Kane to speak to us. Jim is the chairman of the Flight Engineers branch of the New Zealand Aviation, Marine and Aviation and Power Engineers. And as Ron said, Jim has done a tremendous job there. He's represented the members and managed the committee in the most competent and diligent manner. He's been a trustee on the Mutual Benefit Fund, the Flight Engineers trustee for a good number of years, and has looked after the interests of flight engineers and in the Mutual Benefit Fund. He's certainly given me a great deal of assistance and cooperation over the years. He's sheltered me from a great deal of flack at times, and he's taken it himself. And certainly we've had a great relationship, and it's certainly appreciated by me. And I would like you to be aware that the Flight Engineers branch of the association has made a significant cash contribution to tonight. So it's not only coming out of Brian's budget for Ron to pay, but the Flight Engineers Association have made a significant contribution to this. And now, Jim, if I just want to
Wow, what a wonderful sea of faces.
You look like an old man.
Thank you, Peter. I'd also like to express my welcome to you all and add that it is sincerely a privilege for me to have the opportunity to speak on this occasion on behalf of the Flight Engineers Association. I'd like to acknowledge our distinguished guest, Mr. Tannock, and add that this evening will be a significant milestone as we formally end our careers as flight engineers with Air New Zealand. Along with many generations of flight engineers here this evening, there are other important guests that I'd like to acknowledge, as we have been associated with many support groups over the years. To our pilot population, past and present, we acknowledge the role you played in our professional and social lives, and as aircrew, we all acknowledge that a cooperative, constructive and happy flight deck is also the safest flight deck. Whilst we've always had standard operating procedures to determine a standard level of cooperation, we acknowledge that a greater level of skill is achieved when the environment is such that people have the confidence to develop both personally and professionally. In our aeroplane, as ancient as it may be now, the three-man concept was well embraced, making the crew experience both meaningful and pleasurable. You also acknowledged in the aviation environment, flight engineers had needs and frailties. And in this regard, we were able to gain access to the loss of licence benefit through the Mutual Benefit Fund. Some of the trustees are here with us this evening, and I forward a very warm welcome to you. I've always been in awe at the level of commitment and professional skill that trustees apply to the medical welfare of those who are unfortunate enough to need their services. An evening, of course, would not be complete without a thank you to the cabin crew that we have worked and served with over the years. And an extremely warm thank you and welcome to the cabin crew that were on the aircraft today. Thanks very much, guys and girls. There are a lot of old faces out there. It was wonderful to see you, and if you will, please pass on to the rest of the crews if you work around the traps that the flight engineers certainly haven't forgotten you. To our planning, our rostering and administration staff, we acknowledge the vital support role that you played in our everyday lives and acknowledge that on occasions you've had to deal with some grumpy flight engineers. Thanks for your patience, your understanding and the professional care that you applied to the behind-the-scene details that were for us so important. It is also appropriate tonight that we remember our colleagues, both flight engineers and pilots, who we have lost in tragic circumstances. As the social activities of the day are progressing, we'd like to thank the company for the absolutely wonderful gesture in providing an aircraft this afternoon. I'm absolutely sure that very few airlines farewelling their flight engineer rank would begin the formalities with such style. However, I'm sure that the gesture is in part attributable to the professional relationship the company has with you, its flight engineers. And of course, the style and hospitality is continuing this evening, and we hope that this is not just an opportunity to catch up with a vast sea of old faces, but also an opportunity for us to plan for future occasions. So on behalf of the flight engineers, especially our association committee, I'd like to thank Flight Operations for the fine effort in planning this afternoon and this evening. Flight Ops has of course been our parent organisation, and I sincerely thank the successive managers for the constructive relationship that they have accorded our industrial representatives. The one manager above all who deserves our recognition is the Chief Flight Engineer. Over the years, these gentlemen have not only been our boss, but in their own right, successful flight engineers. My special thanks to our present Chief, Peter Allen. Peter, thank you for your cooperation. Thanks for your cooperation, Peter, and your leadership. Let us not overlook the fact, as has been mentioned by Ron, that Peter has had a quite unique 35-year career as a flight engineer in his own right, and on retirement, I think will take with him a service record that's going to be hard to match worldwide. To the guys who have worked for flight engineers on committees, well done on your management of industrial affairs. And especially to Ross, Paul and Rod, who are the immediate past committee. Thank you guys for seeing us through an emotionally difficult flight engineer divestment process. To our past and present association executives, who I would also like to welcome very warmly this evening, thank you for your administrative support over the many years. For my flight engineer colleagues, the divestment of the fleet has been a mixed bag of opportunities. However, we all wish you and your partners the best for the future, whether that be in retirement or in future employment. What it has meant to be a flight engineer with the company will vary from individual to individual. However, we have had a unique opportunity to share in a responsible profession that required competency and technical expertise. The job gave us the opportunity to be part of a team at the sharp end of the aviation industry. As a team player, we're unfortunately no longer required. However, we do recognise that in this industry, change is progress. The flight engineers wish Air New Zealand, its management and its staff all the very best for the future. We've been proud to have been part of the past.
Jim. We certainly appreciate your words. Jim, as a lot of you know, is now working for Air Pacific, and he requested a night off, and they said no. And he was determined he wasn't going to pull a sickie, and so he finally managed, I think, to convince one of the Australians that they could perhaps do the job for him, and he's here tonight, and I'm delighted that he was able to be here. Now, I have an opportunity to express and make some acknowledgements myself, and I certainly don't intend to go over the 35 years that I've been a flight engineer. But firstly, I would like to acknowledge and repeat the thanks that others have expressed to the cabin crew on today's flight. They all volunteered for it, and we certainly appreciate what you did for us, Trevor Rendell and his team. And of course to all the cabin crew that we've operated with over the years, really appreciate what you did. Ron, I think it was, referred to the amount that flight engineers eat, and I remember some time back when Warwick Underwood retired the first time, commenting and relating the story that it is true. The DC-10, because the first class galley was just outside the cockpit door, and in Los Angeles they have those wonderful sandwiches that they have for the crew. Warwick was in the cockpit, and the cabin attendant passed this tray of sandwiches in the cockpit door. Warwick emptied the tray into the flight engineer's drawer, handed it back and said, "Shit, they were good, have you got any more?"
It's just a lie. Thank you,
Now, I've had some